Hello, this is your host Todd Lewis of the Praise of Folly podcast. I am now joined by one new guest and two old guests. Ham, we'll call you Ham. Glad to have you here, Ham.
Thanks.
We have Hunger the Die Merchant back. I think we've had you on once before. Glad to have you back.
Always happy to be back, man. Good to be here.
And Andrew, there we go, the old stalwart. How you doing?
Pretty good. Good evening, everyone.
All right, so this is kind of timely for a lot of reasons. Obviously, the topic of the OGC event this year is what are we going to do with this new meta that we're in, and then also what is the meta? And when I made some comments on Twitter or X rather a few days ago, and all three of you expressed interest in my tweets and in talking about some of these things. So I think we'll begin with one tweet that was extremely popular, which is from yesterday. The current purges of the democratic patronage system is not a purge of the deep state, as some might think. Did the Federal Reserve get dismantled? Did the bourgeoisie get overthrown? Did the Zionists get ejected? No. What we are seeing is the above groups purging the woke. So tonight's discussion is going to be wrapped around this. When I first contacted you, fine fellows, I said, what is our current situation? After defining the situation, we discuss what we think, where things are going, and how best to adapt to them. So just to put some meat on the bones of my tweet, just so we all know where we're at, I believe that this is the sign of broader collapse. John Michael Greer had an excellent tweet, which I don't have at my fingertips at the moment, where he said the sort of bureaucracy that what the Obama-Biden administration represented was inefficient and bloated, and the entrepreneurial, slash and burn, creative destruction of Elon Musk was going to be more successful. Because, if you think about, say, the end of the old right, sometime in the 50s, where, the FDR managerial system was just dominant. And even like establishment conservatives, like National Review, had to more or less play ball. The sort of like entrepreneurial element was there, but it just wasn't as influential as say had been, a century earlier in the 1840s and 50s. And he's arguing that because the energy levels are going down in the system, hence collapse, which ties into a lot of my content, they had to cut that. Unless you want the entire U.S. empire to dissolve in the next 5 years, which it still might, but from their point of view, they're like, we got to cut this fat. Now, the question is, will they cut to the bone? Maybe. They send our jobs to China, so, that's certainly a possibility. But what I want people to think about is this is in terms of catabolic collapse. So this is one step of a broader collapse where a perfect historical example is the Roman Empire. So one of the reasons why the Roman Empire lasted so long is it abandoned provinces that it couldn't defend. Trajan annexed Dacia and Mesopotamia. Hadrian abandoned them because he couldn't defend them. The Romans in, I believe, 406 abandoned Britain because they couldn't defend Britain. And one theory about the fall of the Western Roman Empire, which really wasn't a separate political organization from the Eastern, it was more like having two CEOs, was a strategic withdrawal to protect the wealthier Eastern provinces. So if we have that in mind, we can then think in terms of, okay, well, what can they cut and still be, quote, an empire for as long as they can? And the woke is one of them. We could expect to see in future, I'm not saying under Trump's presidency, that seems somewhat unlikely, further schisms. So, for example, the interests of the Boston Brahmins, if you will. So, for example, one of the things that a lot of conservative commentators would say back in today about 47, was Truman really wasn't all down for Israel. Because, obviously he was the president at the time of the UN, gave Israel its land, but it was sort of perceived to be under duress, at least by a lot of conservative Zionist commentators. So there's some potential for friction there, which may or may not bubble up, especially if Israel becomes too expensive to prop up. A little darker would be the House on Un-American Activities Committee, which was famous in the Cold War for McCarthy using it to arrest communists and communist sympathizers, was first used in the 1930s and 40s by FDR to round up right-wing agitators he thought were fascists. Now, if we have the Zionists in control, then will they do that? I don't know, but that's something that would be like a worst-case scenario that we would want to avoid. And then, that's the meta. And I think with Trump, the modus vivendi has been established. I get the feeling that there were other elements of the deep state that were like, these budgets just don't work out. It's almost like, before Trump and Musk, no one was reading the budgets. And as we see with USA, that seems to be the case. So it could be a kind of strategic withdrawal, like take one step back to take two steps forward, a la Lenin. So this is just a brief overview of what I think the meta is presently. I would not consider this to be a circulation of elites, but rather the elites cutting fat to keep the system going. We'll begin with you, Andrew. What were your thoughts on where we're at?
I have a different perspective. I think it is closer to a circulation of elites than what you're articulating. The key thing that seems surprising to me, right, and we'll see how over the next few years it turns out, is that a lot of the support for the sort of Democratic Party patronage that we're seeing seems not to be quote unquote organic or implicit or through donations of even like philanthropic donations of moneyed interests, but literally coming from like USAID and other things like that. Data Republican has posted a lot of stuff about the things that we're seeing with these NGOs that are donor advised funds, and that there's a lot of money and mechanisms for the patronage politics that we're seeing coming from that. So that, I think, is the part that is the most surprising to me, and whether or not that shakes out in the future is sort of the key question, right? Because the sort of new reactionary take was that leftism and progressivism were sort of just these natural degenerations of society as it became richer and more secularized. And what it looks like is that may be still true, but there was a lot of accelerant in the form of funding for these things, sort of both at the first level of propaganda purposes and at the second level of paying activists to engage in these things.
Well, one point I want to ask for a clarification on, Andrew, is when you're saying circulation of elites, do you mean young people replacing old people? Because that always happens. Or do you mean people with different ideologies replacing people with other ideologies? So, for example,
I mean ideological change.
Okay. Yeah, Hunger. So it's all you.
Well, I mean, not to spring off that one point. I think this is also a very generational change, and you can see that in people like J.D. Vance, for example. Like J.D. Vance in 2016 was a very different character than the J.D. Vance of today, but he's very millennial coded, and as the boomers are literally dying before our feet, you know, the day of the pillow is getting closer and closer every single time. So many people in Congress have to be on their way out or already in like their retirement homes. You're going to see a different regime once the younger generations start taking power, especially Gen X. You know, I think it was Jason Miranchuk and Pete that were saying Gen X doesn't have a lot of time in the sun because the boomer generation has been so has had such a tight grip on power since basically like the late 70s, early 80s, that the Gen Xers are not going to have a lot of time in the sun, and those people are people like Elon Musk, very important people. But I am closer to Andrew's point of view when it comes to it is a circulation, but it's more of a this is real intra-elite competition. And what I mean by that is that what I see is the financial elite have turned against the bureaucratic elite. Because if you look in 2020, look at the donations. There's a very famous chart of the donations to Joe Biden and the Democratic Party, in regards to all the corporations and all the big companies in America, including the military, the healthcare sector, all that stuff. And it was literally 98% in favor of Joe Biden. And then the 2% for Trump was like, I don't know, the NYPD and like the U.S. Marine Corps, something like that. That was the only very large institutional support. Trump got back in 2020. And I think we've seen since then, very famously, people like Bill Ackman, people like Jamie Dimon, very big financial elites have really come around to Trump's side. It's not even that, you can argue, and I know you probably will, Todd. You will argue that, like, are they using Trump or is Trump using them? But I don't think it's that simple. I think it's a very mutually beneficial relationship where the financial elite are getting what they want and they're purging the bureaucrats from the system.
Yeah. Well, so to that point, Hunger, just before I hand this off to Ham, I view this sort of like how the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages would have the prince whack the heretics so their hands are clean. That's sort of what I view this as. Oh, well, Trump's going to get his hands dirty, and we don't have to do any of this. That's sort of how I view that operation. But Ham.
Yeah, I think I was assuming Trump would win the election, and I was really skeptical that it was just going to be kind of that pressure release valve psyop where the right feels like they won. Now let's go behind the scenes and basically, do whatever we want for Israel or the banks or whoever. But I think something happened where the pressure release valve sort of came in the form of X and free speech. So just through Elon's autism and caring about, things being true versus, being nice. I think that sort of unchained a lot of the American spirit that's been contained in all these different, you can't say what you want at work, you can't say what you want at school, you have to be careful around your family members. I think creating that space allowed this energy to build up that as soon as Trump was shot, it all became kind of this targeted, released, just wave of force. And I feel like that's just been moving through the institutions steadily since that point. And in terms of cycling the elites, I think, like Hunger was saying, people have pivoted from, their interest being in the Democratic Party to now thinking they can have more success with the Republican Party. But they're also rewriting it. I mean, Trump calling out like Nikki Haley and all the people who were sort of disloyal to him. On the surface, it appears like he's being kind of egoic and you weren't my friend, I'm going to badmouth you. But I think at some level, he really does have this warm 1950s kind of compassion for Americans. And if you're harming them, like, it's a win-win for him to both empathize with Americans and, shit on the people who were defying them and trying to mistreat them. So I think when the corporations or the larger interests like Jamie Dimon, Mark Andreessen, et cetera, when they pivot towards Trump and you see that corporate alignment with state power, I think that's like the enemy's worst nightmare, because it's the fascism, right? It's what they've been telling us he was all along, and we're supposed to be afraid of it, not because it's necessarily some kind of immoral thing. It just lets people connect like the levels of society so that their lowest and highest people are sort of getting along, represented, and interacting in peaceful ways.
Okay, two other overlays I want to add to this that might affect your opinions already. I know that, of course, Trump has talked a lot about the illegal immigration and tightening things up. And a lot of people who employ illegal immigrants are scared. Now, what he means by illegal immigration is, I think, still a bit of a riddle, because he's waffled on that. Sometimes he says we're going to ship them back, like with the Arabs in 2017 or something. And then now he's like, we want more. What?
The Muslim ban.
Yeah, that's it. And then he said, oh, we want as many immigrants as possible. But I think whatever, between the rhetoric, right, because politicians have this rhetorical scope, I think Trump is working on a heavy hand against immigration. And this is why I actually think the bourgeoisie is still in charge, because yes, the bourgeoisie employs immigrants and illegal immigrants, and so does the petite bourgeoisie. But guess who can suffer the loss more easily? The bourgeoisie. So they kick the legs out from underneath these, local elites that are importing and choking off labor with, from Latin America mostly, but, other places. You got India coming in, even Europe, like Ukrainians. And so this looks like economic warfare, where they're like, okay, we're just gonna kneecap all these little business guys and then suck it all up for pennies on the dollar when they're done, because I think they can use either AI coding or robotics to replace the workers entirely. They don't actually need the illegal immigrants anymore. So the smaller businessmen do. So I could view this as a kind of economic warfare against them. And then second of all, with X and specifically the H-1B visa brouhaha with Vivek Ramaswamy, I have a feeling this is all kayfabe. Like, there was in the 90s and early aughties this like tech bro dream of direct democracy on the internet, and it kept failing. There was a famous experiment where like people were playing Pong or something. It was covered in episode 1 of Machines of Loving Grace by Adam Curtis. And it looks like Elon Musk finally delivered, because X is like instantaneous direct democracy at light speed. And it hard outflanks the Democrats, because if you can literally get, I don't know, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of likes on your tweet overnight, no matter what the Democrats say, they don't have the popular support at that point. And so it's a kind of way to outflank them. We'll start with you, Andrew, on that, or Hunger on that one. There we go.
No, I just wanted to touch on that H-1B visa, because I think, I mean, even if I transport myself back to Christmas, which was literally, a month and a half ago, when we were having the entire H-1B visa debate till now, I mean, the position we started at on Christmas Day, when Vivek and so many of these characters, brought the issue to the fore before Trump was even inaugurated, and where we are now. The thing about the H-1B visas, I mean, not just the exposure, I think it's very interesting that this administration actually takes into the account what freaking Twitter anons are saying. I mean, like, it's the pipeline from Twitter anon to official press briefing at the White House is incredibly short and incredibly fast in comparison to what it used to be. But the biggest thing Trump has done, and like, I think this is economic warfare, but I don't think it's economic warfare in the way you're saying. When Trump made the executive order to end birthright citizenship, which was obviously blocked by a judge, and that's going to go to the Supreme Court, and I think everyone is pretty confident how the Supreme Court will handle that decision. If you don't have birthright citizenship, it's very easy to get rid of 90% of the problems of the H-1B visa, immigration. Like, for example, Dubai. Dubai is a city-state with 80% foreign workers of all ethnicities, from Europeans to Bangladeshis, doing all sorts of work, from high tech to cleaning toilets. And it's not a problem in Dubai and many of these places, because they have a very effective security and police force, and because no one is a citizen of Dubai. No one is an Emirati citizen. They are all there at the leisure of the government, and they don't get benefits that natives do. So I'm not going to say that having them here doesn't matter, but if you cut out, the legs from under them, these people can't anchor baby their way into America. It would solve a very significant percentage of, the actual problems immigration causes.
It would. Before we hand this off to Andrew, we got a super chat by Bloodbase for $9.99 by Bloodbase. Thank you very much. Yeah, Andrew, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the two things that I would say is, contrasted with the level of non-enforcement by the Biden administration, even getting to sort of early 2000s liberal amounts of immigration is going to be a dramatic reduction of like 3 or 4x. And what I suspect is something to sort of normalize immigration so that it is actually under government control, rather than this like semi-legal, illegal thing where you have functionally a sort of anarcho-tyrannical underclass that doesn't have legal protections, but also gets legal benefits, economic benefits, and you can sort of, as an employer, almost treat them like indentured servants and things like that. And I don't think that there is a clear articulation of it being economic warfare against who the administration thinks are their enemies, as much as just trying to solve a problem in the same way that, eliminating vagrancy in San Francisco would solve the problem. That's my perception of at least how the most of the Trump administration looks at it. Elon, of course, has his pet issue of H-1Bs or being able to get O-1s and his economic interests. And I think that's sort of the major tension there. I don't think it's actually very well thought out beyond that point.
All right. Okay, I have to do this. This is just for the lulz. Salmon Fish said, if this is for you, Andrew, just proof prime numbers don't exist and are merely an abstract and not only rooted in the square root of 2, they're just odd numbers.
I need to unpack that for a while. That's a pretty galaxy brain take.
Well, first we assume the opposite and come to a contradiction. I mean,
all right, okay, Ham, it's up to you now.
I'm sorry. I was a liberal arts student, so I'll need like a day and a half to unpack that.
It's just a joke. So what are your thoughts, Ham?
I think it's there are different things that could be kayfabe or not, and the place my mind is going when I hear this is back to a moment in Trump's first term when something that was definitely not kayfabe happened. And the way I know this is the journos were screeching about it. Trump didn't say it about himself. And as with so many things that people accuse Trump of, like the deep right really wants that to be true. They really agree with it. And it was when he said in a room full of people in like a private meeting, he said, why do we have these people from shithole countries coming here? Just the most rude, unfiltered, but bluntly true advocacy for like our country not turning into one of these third world shitholes. And I think deep down he just has that kind of mental aesthetic where he's thinking, yeah, look at all the beauty we could have here and all the great things that America's built and accomplished. Like, how could we possibly just throw that away because like malign go up or GDP or whatever? I think Elon or any of the kind of younger entrepreneurs, I know there's an interest and incentive structure for them to have the cheap labor, but that's definitely colliding with more of like the Bannon nationalist faction of the new kind of right-wing sphere that's out there. So I don't see that just getting. I don't think we're going to get steamrolled by H-1Bs. I think there will have to be a lot of concessions and filters and things to make it acceptable if it's going to happen, like the birthright citizenship thing, et cetera.
Just to back you up on that. Go ahead.
Okay. Just underlining and backing you up with that, right? Like, if all the immigration we had was H-1Bs, right, with no illegal or undocumented or a very small amount, then it's live optionness as a political issue that the democratic process can control is going to be so much higher, right? And the economic tensions will need to be articulated in policy. Go ahead, Unger.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think a big reason why we're seeing, I mean, it's not just that these policies are very popular. I mean, no country in the world is pro-immigration. I mean, all the polling data we have, backs this up. Like, immigration is never popular with any host population. But I think the reason why we're getting elite, or at least tacit elite support on this issue is because of national security. And you can see this with people like Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio is always talking about the national security of the United States. And if you have these foreigners and they're infiltrating high positions in the private sector, at least, that will eventually be incorporated into the public sector, these people are a liability, and these people are security threats. Like who would you trust more? A sixth generation Virginian, or North Carolina, or like someone from North Carolina, whose family has been here since pre-Civil War, or the random immigrant Indian off the boat handling semi-classified information? I mean, the answer is extremely obvious.
Yeah. Now, one thing I was thinking today about where we go from here, right? We've sort of set up what we think the situation is. As I expected, we have some differing opinions on this. But I think there's one screaming obvious thing that the right has not yet talked about. We need to recapture the academy. That's how the left won in the first place. They indoctrinated all these kids because they weren't having their own. And I think that there's, I have a friend, Logos, he's been on here before. He's talked about how there's this massive university bubble. You can't forgive student loan debt. I mean, these kids, and it's personal for me because I went to college right when all this got rolled out and got pretty much screwed. So there's a couple ways you could look at this. You could skin this cat. The first one is, I am happy to see that Musk is moving towards a more merit-based system. So in the same way that people are calling for the expulsion of woke from, like, say, I don't know, business or government, they got to get kicked out of the university. These people just should not be having jobs teaching complete nonsense and then having kids get like $100,000 into debt. That's just ridiculous. Second of all, none of these professors actually know what they're teaching. I know because I went to college. And then second of all, maybe we are on the cusp of one of the libertarian dreams where we just end run the dinosaur universities. Think of Khan Academy, right? Where you start having this. I mean, basically everything up to college he covered, right? So it's like, okay, that's outside of the university system. The problem is that doesn't count as a diploma yet. So people still are like gate kept by these fake symbols. And that was one of the leading libertarian talking points, back in the aughties and early 2010s. We could see that. And even more with the rise of AI tools, we could see, and I remember hearing this from libertarians like 10 to 15 years ago, people could start creating like TV shows and movies, Hollywood level, just, with AI tools. And so you could start having this massive pushback on the culture as well, because yes, they were propped up by these subsidies, but what were the money going to? It was going to universities. It was going to art creators. It was going to all of this culture and education. And the right to win really needs to recapture all that and or dismantle it and replace it with something new. Andrew.
Yeah, so an interesting thing, and I hope this works out as intensely as it could, is one of the major issues we run into, right? And I agree with Logos and you about recapturing the academies, but a major part of this is the way that our nation works and the state works at all levels is through bureaucracy. And typically the way that it works in America is there's a pipeline from the academy to think tanks, to policy, to bureaucratic execution of it. And what might help with this, right, and Elon is showing some indicators of this, at least in the executive, is replacing the personaged bureaucracy with something that is more equivalent to the bureaucracy in a commercial organization. So everything is much more directly controllable by the executive. And this has an interesting aspects to it, right? Because now, if that's the case, we've sort of cut off the connection between the academy and power, at least at the White House or the executive. And hypothetically, you could do that with other state governments as well. And if that's the case, then there's less ideological power to be had by taking over the academy, which would make it easier for us to retake it, basically.
Yeah. So another super chat, real quick. Our boy Bloodbase is doing good. $9.99. Thank you very much. Feel free to ignore this. Just practicing patronage. Well, there you go. We're seeing it already, guys. Before I hand it off to you, Hunger, the other thing I was thinking about is a lot of these universities might just be defunded anyhow because there's just not enough money in the system. And so that would sort of like self-cannibalize. And then it would lead to a leaner, probably more digital space for education. Hunger.
No, absolutely. And if you pay attention to, I guess, the foreign student funding mechanisms, I mean, so many of these universities are propped up by, foreign students getting, getting visas to come to the United States to study, and these are supposedly the cream of the crop. I'm going to press X to doubt on that issue, but when it comes to the universities, I completely agree. What's happening is not enough. And I know there is going to be an executive order. I mean, this is not confirmed, but everyone's talking about it, so they expect it to come down the pipeline. Everyone is saying Trump will have an executive order, dismantling the Department of Education, which is 100% the absolute correct thing to do. This is like my 2017 libertarian dream, getting rid of the Department of Education. But it's just not enough. Moldbug, for all his many faults, took his logic to the extreme, saying it's not enough just to liberalize it and bring it back down to the states. You need to dismantle the existing universities and pour funding into the new institutions, and that's how you create a new educational environment. So we're already seeing the destruction of the existing university just through AI. If you talk to any young Zoomer, they're not learning anything in university, and the teachers are having the professors are having a huge battle trying to distinguish, what is AI and what isn't AI when their students turn in their paperwork. It's absolutely insane. So no one is learning anything. So all the actual benefits of a liberal education are just not there, and it's all just a giant networking opportunity for young people, which is a good thing, but that's not the purpose of the university.
Yeah, and just sort of underlying that point, right? And I think that neo-reactionaries like Yarvin are correct about this, is that most of our elites are sort of academic adjacent in the sort of professional managerial class. And the other fork that we should do, right, besides reforming the academy, is actually coming up with a cultural selection mechanism for elites that isn't academia adjacent.
Hammer.
I would say there's a really good opportunity here in terms of funneling money, because one of the things I love about our timing is the left have done so many awful things. They've essentially made it okay for us to do that. That's not to say that everything they do is moral and we should drop morality and do whatever they do, but you could literally just tax the hell out of university endowments and take the money and put it into brand new institutions, and starve the ones you don't want and turn them into museums, a la Moldbug. And then our new AI, whatever university thing that we want to use for credentialing can replace it. There's a lot of institutions are vulnerable to that right now, which I think is something that's in our favor.
I mean, if you just reformed the default laws, the bankruptcy laws, that would be a huge blow to the universities.
It's all rift. It's all slanted in their favor, just so they can charge the shit out of you. You can't default. Get all these endowments tax free, no standards, no audits. I mean, it's rotten.
You wouldn't even need to tax it. You can just have universities co-sign student loans, and that would
and be liable. Yes.
But the point that I'm getting at is, I think on a macro level, because when we say what is to be done, and a lot of people in our circle are talking about that can mean at least one of two things, right? It might mean on the meta, the national level, or it might also mean what to do on an individual level, and that's important too. But the one thing that Andrew and I, we seem to agree on, is that the right isn't talking about education and by adjacently the arts. I mean, so many people bought into this absolute nonsense by just being exposed to Hollywood films. That was sort of the whole shtick of Blackpilled, Devin Stack. And I mean, he's right. It just mind-effed people, and they just believed in complete nonsense that could never be. And then it was reinforced in the academy because they wanted people to have the right opinions, hence the rise of political correctness. Hammer?
And it turns out that there was a ton of money going towards this, shockingly enough.
Well, yeah, shockingly enough. But my point is, up to this, Aaron Wrenn once had an article, a year or two ago. He says the conservatives and the right don't have an answer to education. And the reason why the left kept winning was even if their answer was bad, they still had an education or a solution. Now, at this point, they've crapped the bed so bad, I don't think they have a solution for anything. But it still isn't an answer to just not have an education system or a cultural system.
Yeah, and to sort of underline this, right? If you look at the Republican elite, even the very conservative Rubios of the world or what have you, their children aren't like going to Thomas Aquinas College or these small independent conservative places. They're actually going to mainstream universities, right?
Mhm.
If I could just add to that one.
Go ahead, Hunger.
Very, 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 very briefly. Sorry, Hammer. Just very briefly. I think a big reason for that is not to cuss too much. It's the fucking boomers. It's the fucking boomer cons.
Yeah.
They despise. They just want to grill, and they despise funding art or funding anything that's not a practical skill. This is not a problem with millennial conservatives or or just anybody who's not. Just anybody who's not a boomer, like younger right-wingers anyone under the age of 50 wants right-wing media, and we jump through hoops to find right-wing media in all the stuff we like all the stuff we like in like the mainstream culture, like Starship Troopers or Star Wars or Lord of the Rings, and there's a lot of right-wing things in the content there, but we didn't create those. We didn't create those ourselves. But that is going to change when, Gen Xers and millennials do come more into prominence in the arts.
So
and this is actually
we have another super chat real quick, and this is a guy that I met from the first time I went to the OGC in 2023. Glad to have you back, Chase. $10 for a super sticker. Thank you. We'll begin with you, Andrew.
Yeah, and I agree, Hunger, but this is actually adjacent to the problem of us not having an academy system, because who makes high art or art for art's sake or even idealized art in a society? It has to be basically your leisure class, right? And the issue is that most of our right-wingers in America are either middle Americans or basically it's a primarily middle American movement, right? Most of the right-wingers are working stiffs of one type or another. They're not scholars or endowments. And part of the need to capture the academy is to actually capture the subculture adjacent to that has the leisure or capacity to just make art, right?
Well, to be unpopular here, I'm gonna BBC simp, because at least they can still produce sometimes good art. And the reason is it's state sponsored. You can't leave this up to the market, because as we saw in America, it doesn't happen. In, say, for example, the Baroque period, when we had both the Catholic Church and various princes in Europe, these were organizations that had shielded themselves from market forces and were then able to furthermore shield art to creators from market forces. And the reason why you have to do that is for two reasons. Reason number one, art is sui generis. You can't have, okay, you got a deadline, you got 4 quarters. I want you to create this masterpiece in 3 quarters. That's not how it works. I mean, it took Gibbon 10 years to write his entire Decline and Fall. And then furthermore, if it's for profit, then you may not even see a return for a long, long time, and just no one's going to pay for it, as we've seen in the United States. Hammer.
Yeah, I agree with that.
You got to be a good patron. Just okay. Please continue.
Yes. Our patronage networks need to grow for sure. There's some, I want to say it's from BAP, where he says, like, whatever the new right becomes, it will be an aesthetic movement, and iconography and just paying attention to aesthetics, from your own physical presentation to the way you write and speak to the way you sort of let your home look. My wife and I are really into this lately. It's just, it's become really important to us that all the things we're experiencing with our senses need to be pleasant. It's not a hedonism thing. It's like, it's for wellness. I want to look at things that are beautiful. And whether that's our garden or, kind of where we're spending our free time. I think having people, the boomers are definitely a hindrance to this because they're the people who uh, sort of are in like the mega church space with the rock band and there's the Starbucks in their church. Like they don't. I think that just the level of comfort boomers were able to achieve coming out of like post-war America is like hypnotizing to them. But because it didn't trickle down to their descendants as they're on the way out, like people are our age, I guess, millennial and Gen X, they're a lot more open to and hungry for true aesthetic expression. And it's coming like right now, it comes through in all of these really meta ironic kind of trash media forms because like everything's controlled and under the influence of like the blob. But I think as that breaks down and separates, there will be some really powerful arts that emerge. I know this from coming from like a underground music subculture growing up. Like it used to be really cool to skateboard and play punk rock and like go to heavy metal shows. And honestly, like I can't even put up with it anymore. Anytime I go out, everyone just looks like a shitty blue-haired college student, no concern for their appearance. They're offensive and loud and obnoxious, and there's no more cohesion between like the ideals and the presentation. So I think just the fact that that's so absent now, I think will call into existence a new form of that, which we should be responsible for as future elites.
So I want to make a brief comment here before we move on. Just so everybody knows, Hunger the Die Merchant does have a hard limit at the 1 hour limit. So we have about 20 more minutes with Hunger. The rest of us, I think, are going to keep going. We have a lot of good energy, a lot of good ideas to explore. So I think then, well, actually, to this point about aesthetics, I got another bugbear. And the Solar Bros, like, say, Bronze Age Pervert, Solbra and for some Raw Egg Nationalists. They've talked about redesigning cities. One of the things that the old right used to do, think of like Bill Lind, was there was a certain school of thought about building aesthetic and usable cities and towns. I forget what it was called, but yeah, the way cities are designed is just meant to just spiritually oppress you. So, for example, one of the things that because part of how municipalities fund themselves is they create speed traps, so people just get like slapped with fines by cops for quote speeding and also asset seizure. Well, because they designed the city that way. You designed a trap. That's on you. If you design an ergonomical, livable city, you wouldn't have these traps. And furthermore, we'd be able to get around. And I remember hearing a few years ago, one of the reasons why people loved college so much was it was the one time in their life that they could socialize just by walking around. So there's that. And so it is nice to see that they are, at least a segment, right, of this group that we're talking about is pushing for more aesthetic, livable cities. Hunger.
Oh no, absolutely. Walkable cities is not a left-wing idea. I know it gets a lot of shit online from who exactly? From the fucking boomer cons.
The boomers.
It all goes back to the boomers. Walkable cities is not a left-wing idea. Just like environmentalism is not a left-wing idea. It can be either left or right depending on its purpose and how you use it. This is just how humans lived for 90% of their existence until the 30s, when cars were mass produced enough to be viable for middle class people.
Yeah, there is no such thing as a left-wing idea. I'm realizing, like, if you consider the people that just ran for office on the left to be leftists, like Thomas recently said, these hyper-capitalist, opportunist people, they would disgust Marx, right? Like he would have no tolerance for the way the Biden Kamala conglomerate behave. So yeah, that dualistic thinking where we think like, oh, we can't have a social safety net, that's socialist or that's leftist. That's just like ANCAP libertarian spurging. And you should be able to take any idea from any group and repurpose it for your own trajectory and not get caught in the idea that like it has this label. That's such a boomer take, right? Like, oh no man, that's socialism, I don't like that. Like what the fuck are you talking about?
Well, the other thing to add here, real quick, is like think of like all of Marx's best ideas. They come from Thomas Carlyle, and they even admit some of that, like the cash nexus, is an idea they take from, which is, is Marx a red reactionary? I mean, some people have argued that. Andrew.
Yeah, I guess the thing that I was going to say is, like, all the things you're talking about are especially ticks of like libertarian boomers, right? Like in my town, they have a classical philharmonic, and everyone that goes there is a liberal boomer who dresses up in a tuxedo or evening gown, and they're incredibly woke. They think that like Kamala Harris is the moderate candidate, and they have these great aesthetics, but they have made this Faustian bargain, right? And that's sort of the way I look at leftism or progressivism, is it's this spirit of Faustus that you have to be cognizant of, right? Not necessarily any specific policy or approach. And it's not merely the aesthetic, but it's the use of the aesthetic. Are you doing this so that everyone can love you more easily, and that you in turn can love people more easily? Or are you doing this because you believe that this is going to like evolve humanity? And I guess that's sort of my perspective, is that the underlying teleology is what's important. And aesthetics are important, but you gotta have the soldier under the armor, right? You can't just wear armor and be a soy boy.
Yes.
So you're saying we can't have the empty armor suit from anime shows? You can't have that guy?
Yeah, you gotta be careful not to be an empty suit. How about that?
Well, so one thing
let's not get into the anime. Let's not.
No, we're not. We're not going anime. It's just a joke. It's a joke, guys. The other thing that I think is actually huge, right? So the other thing we need to look at is, in this sphere, there are those of us that are more or less established and those of us that are more or less not. And one of the main reasons why those that are more or less not are because a lot of necessary networking knowledge and procedural knowledge, like how to start a LLC or how to apply for some government grant or permission, was intentionally gatekept by boomers and Xers, because we lived in a fungible economy. So you're not special. Any other doofus could do the job for you, hence the entire immigration scandal. So in order to protect their fungible position, they intentionally gatekept and lied the rest of us. Enter AI tools. I think Sam Altman with ChatGPT and Elon Musk with Grok, or whatever you want to call it now, could be a renaissance that would allow people that got left behind to figure out. Oh, like for example, if you wanted to ask somebody, "Oh, how can I start an LLC?" A lot of Zoomers, no one's going to tell them. They're either just not going to tell them full stop, or they're just going to lie to their face. If you ask ChatGPT or Grok, they're actually going to tell you how to do it. So I think we have potential for a renaissance with the people that got left out due to, on the one hand, boomer Xer gatekeeping, and on the other hand, the liberal academic woke gatekeeping, finally getting access to real information and knowledge they can get ahead. Hunger, you got less time, so you.
Yeah, just for older people in the chat, I'm really happy you mentioned that. But like for anybody who is like over the age of like 35, you would be incredibly surprised how many parents did not teach their kids how to buy insurance or file their taxes. This is just basic stuff that if you're living in the United States, like you just need to know if you're like over the age of 18. And there are like thousands of children who have never learned this at all from their parents, like how to do their own freaking taxes, or how to buy insurance, or how to fix a tire in a car. Like these are things that have been basic stuff in the 1990s, for example. It's just incredible. I don't think AI is the solution. I'm not I'm not long on AI. Maybe that's just a Luddite in me, but there's definitely going to be a reestablishment of more traditional networks. Like I am pro nepotism, and I think the millennials have been so scarred, and the Zoomers have been so scarred by the older generations, that they're going to have to bring back like nepotism into their like social structure.
No, no, I'm not saying that you're wrong, Hunger. That we need to go to like organic community networks. We look out for each other, but we're not there yet. And what I'm saying is, in the interim, I believe that these tools, because for example, at least when I scroll through X and look at all the Elon Musk tweets, he's like, we need to get these tools in the hands of the people so they can actually start getting ahead. He seems to already know this has happened. So a little bit of noblesse oblige or benevolence from Daddy Elon. What do you think, Andrew?
The fundamental problem to most economic success, at least in a Western context, as opposed to a tribalistic one from like Central Asia, is it's not who you know, it's not what you know, it's who knows that you know something. And one of the things that we're really missing, and universities kind of do this to some extent, is we need a context where it is easy to discover the economically valuable skills of others and their basic trustworthiness and character, so that we can flow the things that we can't do but are valuable to us for them to do. This is what the Rotary Club and Masons and things like that used to do. But the issue with those things is they're not as widespread as they need to be. And part of this is sort of this growth of the power of the academy and the school system, right? Where, like, another example is ethics is just left up to the schools or things like that. And that runs into other issues because that's a basis of the progressive power base, right? The school system. And the boomers are to blame in some sense, but at the same time, they are the generation that was raised by TV. So in some sense, it's sort of a family curse from the greatest generation too.
Yeah, you're right. That too. Hammer.
Yeah, I think I feel really grateful just being born in the 80s. Like my mom showed me how to get my first credit or debit card, and my dad showed me how to change a tire. I'm very big on that in my home in terms of like teaching my kids how to fix things. Every time I get my tools out, the kids like run after me, like want to see what dad's doing. So yeah, there need to be ways to bridge that gap with younger generations for sure, because and I've seen little things like this where there's a guy on YouTube who's like, hey, if you don't have a dad, let me show you how to do this stuff, like shave and that's
how to tie a tie.
Yeah, how to tie a tie. And I don't think that's like a suitable alternative from being raised from TV, right? Like you don't want to just be raised by YouTube. But a guy in our OGC group mentioned this thing called Exit Group to me recently, where he needed someone to do some video editing, got in there, and apparently Exit Group is just all our guys. It's like, I don't know how maybe it just spreads through word of mouth, but essentially these people were like super reliable that he worked with. I'm going to go and put myself on there for like software contracting stuff to do on the side. But just knowing that exists now is like a really cool thing. They've got a few hundred members, and they essentially do that thing you were saying, Andrew, where they allow you to demonstrate competence. As you do so, it becomes recognized, and by being recognized for your competence, that's kind of the stuff you need to get going and sort of make your mark and demonstrate skill in that way.
Hunger, you're the one that's gonna have to knock off first. So we'll let you say your piece now, I guess.
Yeah, no, I mean, this has been a great chat. I always enjoy talking to you, Todd. I can't wait to see you at the upcoming OGC event, which is going to be a hell of a blast. I hope you bought your ticket already, because tickets have been sold real fast.
Well, yeah, I'll look forward to seeing you too, Hunger. So the thing though that, well, the other thing too, when we talk about like moving forward, we need to like think in terms of stages, right? Obviously, it's too soon to clean up the university and the arts, but that needs to be on the plan, right? Also, building real social networks. I mean, I think in some sense, getting information with AI tools is a stopgap. I mean, obviously, I don't want to keep it there. And I think like with the arts, you need the government. Like, why don't you just have everybody go to like JFK Jr. wants to do, rope people in for physical fitness, then put them to work for the second New Deal, rebuild America, and everybody has skills and they're healthy and they know what to do. Like, this is how you fix it. Andrew.
No, absolutely, and yeah, if you, like I said, if you want good art, you have to be a good patron. And I'll end on that note. I got to get going, chaps.
See you, Hunger.
Good night.
Good to have you.
Good night. I'll take care.
Yeah, I guess the attitude I would take is the first thing we have to do is figure out what's a ratchet, right? Assuming that the patronage networks of progressives do get this fatal wound from Doge, how can we make sure that stays that way? And how can we build on that success, right? And one approach, of course, is to just, as Orrin McIntyre says, make sure that enemies are defunded and friends are funded, which is what you're talking about. But the other thing is we have to create the cultural habit of the appropriate accountability and observation to make sure that it stays down, basically.
Well, I think part of the answer to this is, think of like how a fungus grows in the dark, especially if it's wet, right? We have a lot. We've built society to be like fungal breeding, like literally, but I'm using this figuratively as well, though. And a lot of the rot that we're seeing now, like in USAID, or just the broader cultural rot that we're now seeing as everything falls apart, was kept hidden. Why? Who was hiding it and why? Well, a big part of this is the way we've designed how to live, right? James Howard Kunstler in Geography from Nowhere writes about just how idiotic these suburban sprawls are. It's just idiotic nonsense. Ultimately, I believe a lot of this could be solved if we coupled a lot of the insights from the Solar Bros. So we had livable, walkable cities that were open, airy, and aesthetically beautiful. People were trained either by their parents or by the government to work out, and they all were eating food fried in animal fat and eating protein. Most of these problems that people have are because they've been starved of some aspect of life, either human touch and affection, health, which is a combination of chronic illness, fitness, diet, and then just being able to get around. If we're stuck in unwalkable cities, you're just going to spend all your time online, and then you wake up as a furry. It's like, okay, well, hammer.
Yeah, that's such a tragic thing. Like I've been writing an article for the last 2 or 3 weeks now, and I keep having to update it because the news changes. So I write, we should bring all the boars from South Africa here and kick off the Chinese farmland owners and put the boars here. And like, now that's happening. So I have to take it out of my article or reframe it. But the general take of the article is that eugenics, despite its like spooky connotation, is actually what would solve so many of the physical and mental problems of our age. Like if my son has a friend over from his school and the kid is like 50 pounds overweight and he's in elementary school, and I see his mom pick him up and she's 100 pounds overweight, I look at my wife and it just like breaks my heart. Like, these people, they shop in the middle aisles of the grocery store. They're being told that like, oh yeah, this is natural, or this has this benefit, or like, there's vitamin C in this, and it's all just like soy cardboard trash. And over the last 6 months, my wife and I have narrowed down our diet to where it basically just is meat, eggs, and a few different vegetables, and all the fats are animal fats. And we feel better and happier than we have in our like 15-year relationship. So I think part of that will just spread naturally because, like, it's becoming cool to be trad or cool to be kind of LARP as a homesteader or whatever. But honestly, like, I really hope RFK gets confirmed, because in the same way that the left doesn't have a monopoly on, social issues or a social safety net, they don't have a monopoly on health either. And it would be really nice to stop putting up faces of like, really dysgenic, freakish looking people in every Target, every contestant on every show, like every reality show, just looks like they're days away from death. And it's not only like, I get why it's happening. It's profitable to make trashy food. This subdued population is easy to control and fool, but it's also so spiritually draining just to try to like go about normal interactions with people who you feel so sorry for. So I'm really hoping that a more kind of focus on population quality, starting with health, is something that emerges from this big kind of momentous movement that we have started.
A couple points real quick. There were no chronic illness on the steppe with the Scythians. Okay, nature is the cure to all this. Eat real food, get in the sun. That's the answer. Second of all, I just was reading through the chats and I remembered E. Michael Jones' Slaughter of the Cities. Right, the way cities have been developed was intentional to break up ethnic communities. Now, he's a Catholic, so he focuses on Catholics, but of course, there were Lutherans, right? There were the Norwegians, there were the Germans, right? There were other groups, and this was a concerted effort to break up these sort of ethnic patronage networks of, Irish Americans, Italian Americans, German or Norwegian Americans, right? That's another thing. That was intentional. And again, I don't think Michael Jones covered all the different facets, but he did lift up underneath the hood. And the other thing is, how in the world did we start eating seed oils? It was an industrial lubricant produced to replace kerosene for cleaning machine tools, and then it became a food in 1911. And I've never heard a single leftist ever talk about this. It boggles the mind.
No, I mean they're like way too concerned with who's playing the latest Robin Hood and is he black enough or something like that. So, but to the point, I saw someone in the chat saying that eugenics is not eating healthy. I get that. I think the point is that doing things that improve the quality of your population, including personal physical health, the genes that you pass on to your children, which come from your own physical body, those are all eugenic in the sense that they improve the quality of a population. And everything that we have now, from seed oils to trashy, disgusting, loud clothing to the mannerisms that people have, the inability of people to find mates and date normally, that's all dysgenic. So eugenics definitely has a very scary aura about it, because when you hear it, you're programmed to think of like Nazi doctors with face calipers and clipboards, like going around and measuring everyone and controlling who's allowed to be, procreating and whatnot. But in reality, like everything we see that we describe as dysgenic, that's a correct assessment. And focusing on physical health and taking care of yourself, it's not just to look cool. Like it actually makes your mind clear. You sleep better, you have better relationships. There's a lot of reasons to treat your body as a temple.
Yeah, Andrew, sorry, we're talking over you there.
I mean, typically eugenics means husbandry of genetics, right? That's what it means in the modern parlance. And there were more sophisticated approaches in the early 19th century. I forget, there's another one where it was an emphasis on trying to make everyone as healthy and clean as possible, while not necessarily thinking about genetics. And I mean, basically, outside of like explicit mutations or genetic diseases, I'm not a very sympathetic to thoughts of gene quality with regard to human development, mostly because we can't predict the future, so we don't actually know what genes will be helpful. So
but I think ultimately So let's sort of go into the other arc that I've been diving into, the Philosopher's Stone and alchemy. If we look at like the arts and culture and education, that's like the psychological, the mental, and then diet, exercise, and living space is the physical. The union of those two esoterically is when you get the Philosopher's Stone. And so I think part of it was these two groups were deliberately torn in half to facilitate the culture war, in order to ensure that nobody was healthy and nobody was mentally sound. And now we're reaching just like peak levels of like screaming in the dark. And a lot of people are about to just wig out, you know. I mean, the day of the pillow people talk about. I talk about the day of the accident. I don't know about you guys, but some people on the road are just kind of, they're really trying to get hit, it seems, you know.
I haven't heard that phrase, day of the pillow. What is the origin of that?
When boomers get killed in bed in hospitals by their diverse nurses.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, one of the issues we're seeing in Canada, right, and these other Western areas is the live optioning of euthanasia, right, which is going to feed into that more than anything else, and it all depends on like what do we prioritize as a culture, right? And I guess that would be the other thing that I would say with regard to Trump winning and apparently cleaning house with a lot of these things is we have to be very careful to have a positive vision of what it means to be an American, right? And this includes health, but we also, have to do our duty to our fellow Americans and fellow citizens, and that we have to be careful not to be resentful to the sins of our ancestors.
Right. So looking both to because what's the old saying? What can't you do with a clenched fist? Grab something new, right? So if you keep holding on to the past, you can't grab onto something new.
Yes.
I think maybe we could also pivot now to like on an individual level for those people that haven't started, taking these steps either because they just didn't know or they couldn't. Trying to figure out how. See, this is where my left coded stuff comes in. I hear this all the time from the right. Well, we need money, we need funding. Right. Well, if you're at the bottom of this capitalist pyramid, you have to start unions. You have to start organizing. I mean, you just can't wait for somebody to just be like, "Pretty please, give me some grit, give me some money, give me some more." Like Oliver Twist. They're not going to do that. You have to put economic pressure on them, and the right is just allergic to unions, which is also why we got invaded by immigrants, because that was the union's job. Because Samuel Gompers writes from like 1890 to 1924 when he dies. That even in his own day, corporations were bribing government officials to look the other way as they brought immigrants into this country against the laws of this country. And the only organizations that had a corporation has its doctrine is to make money. That's what it's contractually obliged to do. And that's what it does. The unions were designed in order to protect working class rights and to protect the border. When that was gone, there was no other organization left to do that. And they had an uphill battle already because of the government. Now, I have a complex theory about how the unions were subverted. I've talked about this on a bunch of other videos. The OG unions, were basically like us. I mean, Jack London was a heritage American who didn't want Chinese taking over the country. So this whole attitude has to change. I mean, yes, being networked with entrepreneurs helps, especially, tech entrepreneurs. But we need to radically rethink how we get money or patronage from people. So, for example, some people think Machiavelli wrote Prince in order to win the favor of one of the Milanese princes, and it just didn't work. It didn't. Hey, he was going full Moldbug. Hey, I can help you run your state better, and he's like, no, thanks, Machiavelli. I don't need your help. That just doesn't work. We need to think about how to use the tools that we have. Andrew.
Yeah, I guess the two things I would say is you have to be careful not to get stuck in these industrial ways of thinking, right? Worker solidarity is still important, and there is an agency problem between capitalists and workers, but the exact mechanisms of labor unions may not work the same in a post-industrial economy, right, with additive manufacture and things like that. So that's something that we will have to work through. The other thing is when it comes to being a philosopher king, it's better to be a king first and learn philosophy than be a philosophy professor and then learn to be a king, right?
Yeah.
So, so part of it, what we have to do is we have to reject the model of our adversaries of the sort of academic activists, and instead we have to embrace sort of being the peasant prince, right? A peasant, the best definition of a peasant is someone who does a little bit of everything. And once we're able to do that, then we can start sort of organizing the systems to do what we want. Right?
So Robin Hood.
Yeah, literally Robin Hood, as opposed to the sort of leftist myth making of Robin Hood.
Well, the other thing too, though, Andrew, I appreciate your point, and we definitely do not live in an industrial society. But like the solution is simple: just unionize all the dock workers and just hold everybody by the sensitive parts between their legs, and nothing gets in.
They do that until they buy them out, right? Because how many dock workers are there? A few thousand. And I mean, you just buy them out for $1 million each, and
well, that's the problem. We don't have the right mindset. That's not the mindset of a labor organizer. That's just playing within the system. Hammer.
Yeah, I think if you have that march in the street, wave a sign, activist mentality, that's for losers. Like, I remember living on the West Coast and seeing that all the time, and it was just so obnoxious. I think it's a lot better to be, like Andrew said, the definition of a peasant being a generalist. Like, specializing is great to sort of get your foot in the door for a career, but in reality, you should be a very dynamic Renaissance man style person. Like, if you're myopic in your focus, you're not really expressing all of the possible gifts and talents that you have. So just at a selfish level, it feels really good to have a wide range of skills. But at the same time, like, you need people. I think Not Me, Not You said this before, like, in terms of the people on the ground in North Carolina, like, we don't need a bunch of new like blogs. We need grunts and people that can go like drive heavy equipment and figure out how to find these people that need help physically. And then when it came to locating them, like, yeah, you need some programmers. They're going to write some software to like look at satellite images or whatever. So it's to be useful in a time like this is really valuable, because we don't exactly know what will be needed of us. So it's better to have a broad surface area from which to draw, instead of just sort of being like, yeah, I'm this one thing. That's all I do.
Well, so your point, Andrew, about being bought out. That's exactly how the left got to power in the first place. They had the slush fund and bought up all the academics. So that mindset itself has to change.
Yeah. So I mean, like, being more concrete, right? I don't have any influence over the dock workers, right? So even if I desired them to prevent the influx of cheap goods or things like that, I don't have any power over them, right? And that's sort of the key thing that I'm trying to articulate, is that the worker solidarity that we want is not the same thing that happened in the mid 20th century and before, where, like, if we were welders, we couldn't have common cause with the dock workers, right? And that's sort of the issue, is that the consciousness is very different.
Well, okay, so before I get to that, we have another super chat from our wonderful guest, Hunger the Divergent, for $10 US. Thank you very much. On Doge, we're doing great work defunding the enemy. It'll be very hard to bring back these institutions once they're gone, but again, that's only half the solution. I think we all agree on that. But my point is a little bit more meta, Andrew, because people in the chat have been talking about Carlisle a lot because I brought him up. The reason why the right keeps losing is the cash nexus. We keep looking at everything behind the veil of can we afford it, rather than should we do it because it's right. So, for example, there was an interview with some Taliban fighters by the BBC right before the U.S. pulled out. So probably like, I don't know, October, November. And they're like, yeah, we don't care about money. If we die fighting in America in the jihad, we win. And it's like, Right. That's how you win. Americans are mercenaries. They're always going to do what they're allowed to do with their money. And if it costs them money, they're not going to do it, which is why they keep losing.
Well, so I mean, the Taliban, in some sense, won, but what did they win? Right? They didn't take over American culture. They were able to basically outlast the attention span of the government mechanisms. The key thing that comes to mind for me, right, is what is the constraint that money is enabling, right? It's not as though, as far as I know, that there's any like right-wing mechanism where we said, okay, if we staff up more people, we will be able to do more things, right? And maybe, and I'm basically countering that claim that this is not an appropriate frame, and I might be wrong on this, but that's sort of the key question, right? Is what is missing that's our constraint? You seem to think that it's money or maybe labor organization. Is that?
Yeah. So I'll rephrase this. The goals, the stated goals of conservatives, of religious people in America, of even modern day dissident right folks, I'm not going to go into this whole dialogue about Carlyle, but it fundamentally severs us. Technology does too. Fundamentally severs us from the kinds of things that we used to be exposed to that allowed us to even develop the conceptual framework. So let me give you an example. We've talked about these, poor soy jacks that are, growing up to be transgender because they're stuck in a city they can't leave because they don't know how to drive, they don't know how to file taxes, all they eat is slop. There's no way that you can realistically expect that person to understand the aesthetic beauty of, say, like, any sort of Rembrandt painting. They're going to have to be cultivated, right? All of this, if you look at Western history from Homer down to World War II, everybody understood this had to actively be cultivated. And it's not being cultivated because, in my estimation, it's not considered profitable.
And how does that relate to? Okay, so the argument, the reasoning is we overemphasize money, so we don't have the values that will allow us to take advantage of the fact that Doge is eliminating the patronage network of progressives.
Wow, that's actually really good, Andrew. Yes, and there's one more point I want to add to that to help you and Hammer and all the other guests watching. So I gave a brief description of what the cash nexus was in a previous video. Let's imagine we have four institutions. We have the church, the family, the government, and business. So prior to the cash nexus, I mean, if we go with Carlyle, I don't know, maybe the bourgeois revolution of 1688, we have families produce natural affection. That's the good that they produce. It's not a market good, but it's a social good. The church is supposed to produce agape, God's love. It produces that in the community. That's a social, not a market good. The government is supposed to produce justice, but as we now know, it doesn't really do that. That's not a market good. And then the business was, so think of like a medieval village, right, in England, probably what Carlyle had in mind. And then you had where the fairs and the districts in the town where the guilds could work. Now, all of these are not simulation. They are what they are. With the ratchet effect of the cash nexus, everything becomes a business. Everything is reducible to cash exchange. And so we look at families, churches, and the government, and we still think they're producing the goods that they were before the cash nexus dropped on the stage. And we're just fundamentally misunderstanding what these institutions are now. They're what Baudrillard would call a second-order simulation. They hide what's there, that these old goods aren't being produced, and instead they're just, clientele money.
So I'm a little confused by that with regard to especially like churches and families. How does a family stop producing natural affection if it's a functional family?
Well, that's the point. I think we're all dancing around the fact that we don't really have a lot of functional families right now.
Okay. So do you mean like families that aren't married or that they don't have the typical bonds between spouses and children? Is that what you're talking about? Sort of the disintegration of the norm of married families having children?
I mean, that's part of it, right? But even if we say control for like, as we talked about with like millennials and Zoomers not knowing how to like file taxes, right? All of this was basic stuff that you would have taught your kids in any other context, but just across the board, families.
I strongly suspect all of those are downstream of fatherlessness, basically, or bastardy, basically.
Well, some are, but there's a lot that aren't too.
I think the thread that ties together all of the different groups and their sort of demise or degeneration is just the materialism experience. Like if you reduce everything to physical value, it's essentially just telling you that, you know, all the dopamine and serotonin that you're supposed to get from the world will be this transactional physical exchange of this or that. And that comes in all these forms through like media and technology and different things that distract you from what's actually important. So you almost have to bootstrap yourself to get out of that. Like for me, I was definitely in that headspace in my early 20s, and just by like having children, I'm so much more in tune with what with the kinds of value that I get from immaterial things, whether that's friendship or family or whatever. I think a lot of the people that suffer in the different under the kind of weight of the money blob are just sort of they're in the haze of materialism. They have no idea that they're not just their body or their thoughts. They're just sort of trapped in that.
Yeah. So I guess to reiterate my point from a different perspective is if we look at, I hate to always go to war, but like war is the highest stakes, you know, you win or die. If one side will fight to the end without caring about money and the other side fights for money, the side that fights for money always loses. The U.S. just keeps taking L's because, well, we're done with we spent enough money in the Middle East. We spent enough money in Vietnam. We're taking our L now. And the commies and the Islamists didn't fight for money. So they kept going to victory. And see, the right, it has this built-in mechanism where it's like, oh, it's a little bit better economically for me now, so I can just stop. Whereas these groups, the communists and Islamists, are like, no, we got to go all the way because they're fighting on it. They're motivated by totally different values. Andrew,
that is sometimes true of certain aspects of the mainstream right. That is not true of, for example, the pro-life part of the mainstream life, which is so ideologically vehement that they will often engage in imprudence, in my humble opinion. That is also not the case for the more ideological nationalist brand of the right, which will also seem to be willing to spend both political and economic capital on things that they're ideologically satisfied with. The fundamental issue, I think, is that I'm not sure that it's actually the case that these other movements are willing and able to fight without money. I just think that they hide it, right? The entire reason that like communists during the Vietnam War or the 20th century got so much money to fight or so much power to fight wasn't because of like ideological fire. They were literally being paid by the Soviets.
Hold on. I'm not saying that they don't need or use money. I'm saying that they're not fighting under the cash nexus. They're fighting under some other rubric of interpreting all of human existence. The Islamists as well.
Yeah, but that's true of everyone except economic libertarians, which I agree they're a pain in the ass, but I don't think they dominate the right to that extent.
Well, I mean, isn't that what we were saying about boomers? That they were like a discount Diet Coke version of that?
A certain subset of boomers are, yes. Typically the ones that were most politically active in the GOP.
Mm-hmm. And so that's why we keep taking L's.
I mean, we can just stop listening to them.
That's happening naturally. I mean, like 2/3 of them are already gone essentially. And I think by 2040, 90% will be gone. So that's, there's not much time, but there's time to transition away from that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like JD Vance does not act like that, as far as I can tell, right? And he's not he might be a bit young, but that's an example.
Well, or let me recast this cash nexus in another way, in a way that I think a lot of us are more intuitively aligned with. One of the key major reasons why we have a fertility crisis, and I'm surprised no one talks about this, right? If you looked at any society before industrial civilization and shoving us all into these megalopolises, childcare was done rurally at home by the women. They didn't go into work. They had work to do. They took care of the kids. They had the kids, and the skills that they had were so. This goes back to Carlisle. Do you use an external device like a tool, or do you use your mouth or your hands, or own organic tools? Well, for childcare throughout most of history, it was mostly, and that's what a woman's body is designed for, taking care of children with some minimal tools. But now everything has been inserted, separating the mother from the child and the mother from her sisters and her aunts and uncles. And so none of this like system that was embedded in a culture was there to help create conditions in which people could easily have children. Like peasants are, broke compared to us, right? But in the Middle Ages, they still had kids. And that's because, corporations thought they could profit off breaking up families by, selling them the birth control and encouraging divorce, which meant you could buy 2 houses, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, we are very much against that in my home. My wife does not and will not work. And I think a lot of her friends sort of just look at her like, really? Like, you don't feel like a slave? Or like they try to give her shit like, well, what do you want to do with your life? She's like, I am doing it. I have my 3 children and I love them and I'm taking care of them. That's my purpose. And we have rural friends that they do this, and they're around lots of families that do this, but I'm fairly close to the city, so people look at us like we're from another planet. They just cannot believe that my wife would want to be home with our children and raise them and take care of them and be like the primary source of affection and love that they get. It's I hope it makes a comeback, and economically there are barriers to that, but I've been very intentional about picking up the slack where I need to make that possible, because it's something you can't rewind and do over again.
Yeah, I'm quite confident, at least in a Western context. The key thing that is causing the fertility decline is lack of marriage, and that's downstream of basically chronic attachment issues in a huge part of the population. The fertility rate of married couples in America is basically 3 to 4 children per married couple. So that people that opt into the traditional lifestyle or find someone to marry and have a traditional lifestyle are pretty good breeders still. The issue is that so few people are getting married.
Right.
Well, but I would say, and again, this is anecdotal, but man, so many homeschool kids that I grew up with just left the faith entirely. I mean, I know this one guy who had 3 sons. They all left the faith. Like, he just did not invest in them, and then they're gone. I mean, in some regards, it might have been better if he hadn't had kids, if that was how you're going to do it. But I guess the other thing, too, is do we want to keep going? I think at this point we have covered most of what I had hoped to.
I'm reaching my limit here. I had a pretty long work day, so I could turn off any moment now.
Yeah, it feels like a natural end.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we already had the wonderful Hunger the Die Merchant. Thank you for being on. Thank you for being on, Ham.
Sure.
Thank you, Andrew Satelites.
My pleasure.
This is Todd Lewis of the Praise of Flight podcast, signing off.
Bye, guys.